In this video, you will learn everything you need to know about Mixpanel in 2026. I have helped more than 100 startups figure out their analytics stacks, and my 2025 video on Mixpanel has over 22,000 views and tons of great comments. Here's how I structure the video. By the way, I implemented my first Mixpanel project over 11 years ago, but implementing Mixpanel in 2026 is much easier as long as you know a few hacks. Before you sign a contract or write any implementation code, you should know the benefits that you will get from using a tool like Mixpanel. It's not for every company or product. I would argue that the main benefit Mixpanel provides is increasing your ability to make data-driven decisions faster, especially for a non-technical audience, which may be marketing teams, some product teams, or really anyone who's not a developer. Here's 3 examples. Let's imagine that you have a finance app and you want to understand where users are dropping off in the onboarding process. We could go to Mixpanel's funnel report and we could simply add the steps of our onboarding process, assuming you have implemented these data points. So let me add the first event, which is called enrollment. This will be like a sign-up event. Then we have a second event where we're going to connect our bank account, perhaps using a system like Plaid or something similar. And then lastly, we have an event when a user completes the onboard called onboard complete. Now we can see that over a 7-day window, and this actually may be a little bit too large, we can assume that a user will take perhaps about 1 day to actually complete the entire onboarding process. Let's hide this for a second. Now we can see that from step 1 to step 2, there's about 10% drop-off. And from step 2 to step 3, there is a much larger drop-off. Let's call it 23%. And we can see that the timing from step 1 to step 2 takes about 355 seconds. That's 4 minutes or so. And then from step 2 to step 3, it's actually about 20 minutes altogether. I could keep digging deeper. For example, I may have properties under the enrollment event, such as platform, and we may only want to look at mobile specifically. So now we have the entire funnel, but just for mobile. We may also actually want to keep all potential platforms and do a breakdown here. And let's go look for the same platform event. And now we get the same funnel, but now comparing web versus mobile. You can see the conversion rate is kind of similar, slightly higher on mobile in this demo account. You can get to a decision on what to do about your drop-off in step 3, in our example, faster, simply because you can build a report quite quickly. You can slice and dice it as you see fit, and you can then share this with the rest of your team without having to wait days or weeks for someone to build the report for you, or in some cases, you may not even have this data readily available, so you cannot even get to the point of knowing that step 3 is where the biggest drop-offs are taking place. Example number 2, let's say that you want to understand what kind of transfers are taking place. So we can go to another report in Mixpanel. We can go find our event called transfer. We plug it in. Right away, we can see the number of unique users that have fired the transfer event. We're going to make this totals, and this will be the total amount of transfers on a daily breakdown over the last 30 days. But we can keep going further. We can go find the same platform property from before, and we see that the data here is actually pretty similar across web and mobile. Let's actually look for another transfer property. Let's go look at transfer type. You can see here that now we have FastPay, and wire transfer. And again, they are very similar. In real data, you wouldn't have such similarities, but in our case, because of this demo data, it breaks down like this. And the third example will be more for growth or marketing teams. Let's say you want to know where your signups are coming from. So let's build something here that's a little bit more elaborate. We're going to take page views, which are firing across an entire website, and we're going to filter down to only the page views that take place on a page called signup right here. Let's assume that the users who fire the page view are the ones who create an account. So this is a proxy for an account created, account completed. Now that we have this data here, we could do a breakdown, let's say by UTM source. These are the web attribution parameters. And we once again can see the breakdown. And here we might make more sense to do as a bar. And we can see that the top UTM source for signups would be Instagram, followed by organic, followed by LinkedIn, YouTube, and so forth. Then we have something where there is no data whatsoever, which we might call this direct in the world of web attribution. Mixpanel gives you a lot of web attribution out of the box. Mobile attribution is a whole different question. You should go watch a video on AppsFlyer on my channel to understand that world. This would be considered a last touch model, but Mixpanel could help you do a first touch, and there's a few other ways you can slice and dice marketing attribution data. If your team is looking for something to help you surface insights faster with minimal technical knowledge, besides the knowledge needed to implement Mixpanel, then this can be a fantastic fit. I love using it. I always enjoy when product people, marketing people really get comfortable with Mixpanel. They can answer their own questions, and it just simply speeds up their work and how quickly they can get to the wins needed to grow their product. If you don't have the right data, none of that cool report building you saw in the previous section will be possible. You have to give Mixpanel the building blocks, which are the events, the event properties, and there is a third building block, which will be user properties. This will be things like first name, last name, email. They effectively describe the user, and Mixpanel does allow you to capture PII, such as email and phone number. You don't have to capture it, but it is an option. And at its core, Mixpanel is built on individual users. So everything you're doing is from the perspective of an individual user, and then this can be aggregated in some of those reports you saw before around transfer types, funnels, and several other things. But you can also go down to a user specifically. Let's say you can look at John Smith and see all the actions that John Smith has taken over the past 30 days. For example, here's a profile on Mixpanel. This is all demo data. We can see their email, their location. We have the user properties I was mentioning before, like the country, the city. This is a finance app, so we have things like credit score, net worth, and then we have the individual events that this user did over some time period. You can see the demo data is all from 2024, 2023. It's important to remember that the quality of the data you put in determines the quality of your output. I have seen many projects with very poor data, poor event naming, not the necessary event properties or user properties, and the whole thing just feels chaotic. 11 years ago, I implemented my first Mixpanel project, and it was quite hard. You had to do a lot of manual things to get everything going. Today, there's lots of hacks you can use to get data into Mixpanel in the right way without a lot of effort. First, if you are tracking any web data, that is a marketing website or a web app, you should definitely look into the auto capture that Mixpanel offers. This is only on web as of the time of this video, but I could imagine this will be available on iOS and Android soon. And what auto capture does is it will collect these events for you out of the box. Page views, page scrolls, form interactions, element interactions, which will then handle clicks like call to action buttons, attribution, which is that UTM data we saw earlier, dead clicks and rage clicks, which is related to how the user interacts with the interface. So to enable auto capture, you simply grab the Mixpanel JavaScript snippet and then you add it to your web app or website, and all the data will start to come through. So you'll get 8 to 10 events without you doing much, and it will have a bunch of event properties that correspond to that event. For example, page view will have things like page path or page title and page URL that can be quite handy. The downside of auto capture is that it can be a lot of data, and you'll see how this actually affects your pricing when we get to that section. And there's also privacy considerations. If you have credit card forms or you don't want to collect PII, you do have to do some thinking on how you will exclude it from the auto capture. And there are some options. You can block things using CSS classes and a few other things. And the auto capture has some built-in logic to not ingest password fields or credit card fields, but you have to double check those things on your app. Number 2, you need a tracking plan. So this is actually a template that I created a few months ago, and you can download it for free in the description of the video. And what this simply gives you is the structure for how you should think about your events, event properties, and user properties. In your app, you should be looking at the key actions users have to take. For example, they can create an account, and you might have an event called sign up. And then you have event properties for that event. Again, in this case, we are collecting PII, but you don't have to. And then user profile properties. If you look at the watch video, in this case, the property simply tells more about this action, such as the video ID, how much time did the user spend watching this video, some of the hashtags associated with the video, and so forth. In your plan, you will have perhaps 10 to 20 events when you make this, and you might implement half of those, focusing on the actions that you care the most, such as account creation, onboarding events, your key aha moments in your app, anything to do with revenue, such as subscription events or purchases, and any events that can help you understand retention. You then choose the SDKs where you will be collecting this event. It could be JavaScript on web, iOS and Android. You may have backend libraries such as Ruby or Python. And this is where you will work with your developers to translate an event like login across multiple SDKs to ensure that you have tracking on all your platforms. And remember, if you use auto capture, an event like page view doesn't have to be captured manually. It can be done automatically by the auto capture functionality, which technically would be the JavaScript SDK that does it for you. The third way you can ingest data is through integrations. Now, Mixpanel does have a few integrations here. Some are things like CDPs, segment.com. Others are special instructions. For example, how do you bring ad spend data from Meta, Reddit, Twitter, and so forth? And this requires Google Cloud. And there's some instructions here. Generally, you will need the help of your developers for some of these integrations. I want to highlight warehouse connectors because I think they're actually quite fantastic. If you have your data already in a data warehouse, or you can easily move it into a data warehouse, such as BigQuery, Snowflake, or Amazon Redshift, there is a way to connect your data into Mixpanel. Now, the schema, if I go down here, still follows that tracking plan we saw earlier. You have to structure your data into events, that is event names with event properties. You'll have a timestamp, some kind of user ID, which can be email, though it's preferable if you have some kind of persistent user ID that doesn't change and that's not PII. And once you have your data structure through the right SQL queries, then Mixpanel can ingest that data as events, event properties, and user properties. And there's a couple cool modes such as mirror mode, where the Mixpanel can actually stay in sync with that underlying table in your data warehouse, allowing you to make historical changes as needed. So this is quite fantastic. I highly recommend you check it out. I think most teams can easily get data into a warehouse and then also easily structure it into the format that Mixpanel expects, saving you a bunch of effort needed at the SDK level. You should also check out what other tools you use, as they may be able to send data into Mixpanel. For example, this is Brace. This is a communication platform where you can send emails and push notifications, and you can send data from Mixpanel to Brace. But what I want to focus on is actually the data the Brace can send to Mixpanel, and it's somewhere down here. So you enable this within the Brace interface, and as long as you have the same user IDs between systems, which is why user IDs are particularly important, Brace will then be able to send all these events into Mixpanel, and each event will have correspondent event properties providing more detail. For example, in the email send, you will have things like an email ID, perhaps a campaign ID, and other things that can help you identify the particular email that was sent. And there's lots of tools out there that can feed data into Mixpanel. So Mixpanel becomes your central hub of data analysis across multiple tools and really across the entire customer journey. These days, most teams use multiple sources, including multiple SDKs, warehouses, and external tools. Focus on quality over quantity. You really want 5, 10, 15 great events that help you understand your product. And over time, you can layer in more data as you become more comfortable with Mixpanel and how to analyze all that data. Let's quickly look at some of the coolest features in Mixpanel right now, and some of the things that I think are quite unique to Mixpanel for you to think about. Whenever I think of cool features, I really want to look at features that can accelerate the analysis workflow that I might go through on a regular day, not just necessarily cool for the sake of being cool. One feature that I really like in Mixpanel right now is metric trees. So this is only available on Enterprise, so you may not see it if you're not at that pricing level. But effectively, what Mixpanel is trying to do is say, hey, you establish your core KPI, which may be purchases or new users or daily active users, and then we're going to have supporting KPIs, and then we can go multiple levels down. This is very similar to the North Star metric, if you're familiar with that framework. And over time, Mixpanel will then start to tell you if certain metrics are correlated with each other, and it can give you a high-level overview as to if you make a change to this one metric, what might happen to other metrics, either lower down the funnel or higher up the funnel. So overall, very, very cool. And I think very helpful for having a more strategic view of your metrics and your business. But again, only on the enterprise level for now. Number 2 is session replay and heat maps. I actually don't have this on a demo account to show you. A session replays just simply show your users interacting with your product, clicking around on web or on mobile. And heat maps show the interaction of users on, let's say, a page, and then which sections are more popular or less popular. What I like about these features is it makes the analysis easier to go from, hey, you had this drop off in the onboarding funnel on step 3. Let's go look at a few session recordings of users who did not get to step 3. And let's also look at the heat map of these particularly pages where users are dropping off. And that can just give you even more nuance as to what is going on and what action steps you should take next. Third, we have boards, which are the dashboards in Mixpanel. It's pretty standard from a dashboard perspective. What I kind of like about boards is that you can add text to it, which then allows you to add context to any chart that you add. So a chart like this, which can be displayed in multiple ways. You may have a metric or a line or something else dependent on the specific chart. Can be helpful, but I find text is always the easiest way to add context to anything. You can add images. You can just have a more complete overview of your data. So as you build charts and reports, you save them into your boards and they become the central source of truth for your entire team or company. Let's look at the AI next. So Mixpanel, like many companies, is adopting AI to a certain level, and they added some features, and I want to show you what they are quickly and my general thoughts so far, at least in 2026. We know the AI space moves very quickly, so perhaps by the time you watch this video, there's a bunch of features that are not even here, and maybe some of these other features have improved altogether. So first, there is an AI feature called Spark, which allows you to create things using natural language. I've mostly seen it here. Let me add a board, and you can use a template, which are actually, I think, quite handy. There's a bunch of cool templates you can use and then just plug in your corresponding events. But if you go to add to board, you can add existing reports that you already created, or you can launch Spark. And this gives you the ability to create charts using just text. So for example, this is the onboarding chart we created in the very first section. We have our 3 events, and then we broke it out by platform. So we can give this to the LLM, and it goes and kind of creates the same thing with the platform. I know how to use Mixpanel quite a bit, so I sometimes don't find this as fast as if I were to do it, or if I'm not quite sure what I want, and I'm going to do some exploration. But you can see it was still pretty quick from typing the text to actually output in the chart. So either way, it gives you another way to interact with your data and to be able to create reports and then make those reports into a board easier. So there's just simply less friction altogether. Second, Mixpanel has an MCP, the Model Context Protocol, which means you can connect your LLMs such as Claude, ChatGPT, or Gemini to your Mixpanel data, and it can create charts and output some of the data within the LLM interface. So connected Mixpanel here to Claude, and the connection is actually pretty easy. You typically go into settings, connectors, gives you this URL, this mcp.org/cp. This is different if you're in the European Union or in India, so check those out. And then it uses SSO, single sign-on, to authenticate your Mixpanel account. Again, that just takes a few clicks. Once you have it, then it is available here as a connector. You can see I have Mixpanel MCP. And I can ask questions, and I'm going to say for the Mixpanel project, this is the finance project we are looking at. Can you tell me the most popular transfer types in 2023 for the event called transfer? I'm specifying the date here because the demo data is only from 2023 to 2024. Otherwise, the LLM then actually looks for recent data, which is much more obvious. As the LLM interacts, it will ask you for different permissions, such as property names or event names or segmentation reports, and then it will then output the data here for you and simply display it. I think this is actually pretty cool. It's still the raw data from Mixpanel shown here with the LLM, but what I think is cool is then you can still add other context here. For example, how do you have any historical data on the growth of usage for each transfer type? This would be outside Mixpanel. So the LLM can actually look at all the data it has and try to add any historical data that it may have. In this case, actually, it doesn't have it. But I always imagine that if you're looking at retention and you have some numbers, you can go get some industry averages and compare it to your Mixpanel data and just give you a richer perspective on what you're looking at. In summary, the AI tools are cool. I don't quite see them yet in my daily workflow, but I can see how they'll become more and more popular over time. I assume Mixpanel will add agents at some point in the future. So I think it's just different ways of interacting with the data. And what makes me excited is I think many teams don't spend nearly enough time analyzing data, and these tools can make that process easier. Let's finish by understanding the pricing model. Now, Mixpanel does have a free plan, and they charge by events. So that is the free plan is capped at 1 million events per month. The main limitation I find in the free plan is actually the number of saved reports. So you can save 5 reports altogether, and then you have 10,000 monthly session replays. Then the growth plan, if we get a feel for, let's say, go for 2 million events, this is what it will cost per month. There are annual discounts that you can get. And there are other things you can add, such as more session replays and so forth. There are also numbers here for how many Spark queries you have. I was looking at that earlier, right here. So 30 queries in the free plan, 60 queries in the larger plan. And the pricing for the MCP is not clear yet. There is a startup plan somewhere in here, where startup actually gets 1 billion events for free in the first year, which is a lot of events. 1 million events per month is not that much. And you would need to be quite careful in what events you ingest into your data. And something like auto capture may not be the right fit. And as we saw earlier, some features like metric trees is only available on the enterprise level plan. Trying to balance how quickly you can ingest data to Mixpanel with auto capture with your realistic pricing limits. So you have to figure out what is the trade-off there and what data would be the most important for you at the end of the day. In short, Mixpanel is fantastic for teams who want faster data-driven decisions with very limited technical knowledge. It really increases the availability of data, and the rise of certain AI tools like MCP, I think, will make that even easier as that becomes much more common. Remember that implementing Mixpanel in 2026 is easier as long as you follow some of those hacks, auto capture, a much tighter tracking plan, other integrations like warehouse connectors, and tools that can bring data into Mixpanel. Don't stop here though. Make sure to check out this next video that YouTube thinks you will find helpful. My name is Ruben Ugarte, and I'll see you in the next video.